Hey everyone, thanks for checking out today's video. This is the first video in what I hope to be a whole bunch of videos on this car. This is a 2006 Porsche Cayman S, and I've been hinting at it for a while that I wanted to swap a K into a Cayman, and it's finally that time. I am here at Eric's shop, my good friend Eric, Levine Motorsports, and we spent last winter swapping a K24 into my Porsche 911. I enjoyed that all summer. Put nearly 6,000 kilometers on that car with no issues whatsoever. It's been amazing. And this winter, we are gonna do it all over again. We are gonna swap another K-Series into another Porsche, and it's this car. Like I said, this is a 2006 Porsche Cayman S. This is the 987 model. This specific car has 80,000 kilometers on it or 50,000 miles on it. And unfortunately, it has a blown engine. This is a super clean car, hardly driven, and unfortunately it has a blown engine. So I've made a unique arrangement with the owner of this car. He got all kinds of quotes. The best quote was $25,000 Canadian to fix the engine in this Cayman. It has bore scoring, took it to a whole bunch of independent shops, confirmed the issue, and it needs to be repaired. So he got a quote of $25,000 to pull out the engine, rebuild it, put it back in, and basically $25,000 just to get this car back up and running, and it will be exactly the same. So he reached out to me. We've come to an agreement. Basically, we are gonna see how feasible it is to swap a K-Series into this car, and if it doesn't work out, then he's just gonna go ahead and rebuild the original engine and be happy with it as is. But this is a great opportunity for Eric and I to see how much work, how feasible it is to swap a K-Series into a Cayman. And I know a lot of people are very curious about this. I've been getting constant messages and all kinds of emails about doing this to a Cayman. Because I guess there's maybe more Caymans out there and there's a lot of engine failures. I don't know. I'm technically not a Porsche expert. I don't know a lot about what happens to the engine, but I do know there's lots of problems and they're extremely expensive to fix. So Eric and I have done a bunch of measurements as much as we can with the engine in place, and it is gonna be an extremely tight fit. Unfortunately, it's not gonna be as easy to swap a K-Series into the Cayman as it was the 911. And not saying that was easy, but it's gonna be more challenging to do a K-swap into this car. There is just a lot less space in this Cayman than there was in the 911. So let me pop the trunk and show you what we're working with. So, K-swap done, right? Let's get this out of the way. The difference between this Cayman and my 911 is that these cars are technically mid-engine. The engine is in front of the axle, the rear axle, and the transmission is out back. So the issue with that is there's just not as much space. Like in the 911, we had all this space back here. In the Cayman, it is very tight up front. So the other issue is these flat sixes are not a tall engine. The K-Series is a tall engine, and there's not a lot of space height-wise back here. So that is gonna be a big constraint. Otherwise, there's tons of room on either side for the intake manifold and the turbo setup and whatnot, but it is tight height-wise. So that is basically gonna be the biggest challenge, is swapping one of these K-Series into this Cayman. And because the height is such an issue, more so than it was on the 911, I think we're gonna go with a K20. So this is a K20. This is a K20 Z3 out of an 8th gen Civic Si. It's gonna be the development engine for this, or the test fitting engine, because as much as I would like to run a K24 in this swap, the K24 is larger displacement, which means more torque. I just don't think there's gonna be enough space to run a K24 in this swap. And the K20 is shorter. It is about 3/4 of an inch shorter than the K24. And I think that little bit of space is gonna be critical to making that work. As we go through the swap, I will definitely try to share with you why and how this is gonna fit with the K20 and not so much with the K24. And realistically, you could do whatever you want. You could make anything fit in this space. But that being said, the approach I want to take on this swap is to basically impact the car as little as possible. I don't want to cut the car up that much. I believe there will be some cutting required, and we're going to get into that as we go through it. But for today, the plan is to actually before we even start, I want to weigh this car. I didn't get a chance to weigh my 911 before I pulled it all apart and did the swap. So I have a set of scales. K-Tune was nice enough to lend me their scales, so I've borrowed them. We're gonna weigh the car before I start taking it apart. Once it's weighed, then we're gonna start pulling out the engine and we're gonna start test fitting to see how feasible it is to fit a K-Series in a Cayman. So why don't I get the scales out, get this thing on the scales and see how much this thing weighs. All right guys, Cayman is on the scales, I have the numbers, and the Cayman weighs in at basically 3,030 pounds basically. Not a lot lighter than my 911, surprisingly. My 911 weighed in at 3120 with the K-Series. So it'll be interesting to see what this car weighs with the K-Series swap done. Weight distribution, I quickly calculated it. This car's weight distribution comes in at 46% front, 54% rear, whereas my 911 came in at 41% front, 59% rear, because this is a mid-engine car, so a little bit better weight distribution. My 911's rear engine, the engine's sticking out the back, so a little bit more weight in the back, but it'll be interesting to see how much this car weighs all said and done with the K20. I'm glad I got this chance to do it before we go and take it all apart. So now that we got that all out of the way, it's time to start taking this car apart, pulling out the engine, and test fitting the K and see how feasible it is to swap the K into this car. So let's get started. All right guys, so we're about an hour and a half into disconnecting everything from underneath and we've made a lot of progress. Pretty much most of the stuff is disconnected at this point and we're almost ready to move up top and start disconnecting things up there. And then it'll be time to drop this thing out. A few little things left, like disconnect the heater core and the AC. The AC I already evacuated at my friend's shop, so we'll be taking care of that. Just gotta disconnect the heater core, disconnect the clutch slave cylinder, remove this brace that spans from both sides of the lower suspension connections. And then we are ready to start disconnecting the engine mounts, which are right there at the front, and then there's one on either side of the transmission. And then this thing will be ready to come out. But while the car is like this and up in the air, I wanted to take this opportunity to discuss one question I got a lot of from people that were also interested in this swap is if it's feasible to mount a K-Series with a K-Series transmission or some other transmission and mount this swap transversely in its like native orientation that you would see in the front wheel drive car, or how they do it in MR2 swaps or NSX swaps or Lotus swaps. Basically try to use this style transmission as opposed to using the Porsche style transmission. And the reason for that being is if you were able to get away with doing this swap without having to use a Porsche transmission, there'd be a lot more options and there'd be a lot more cars that you could choose from. You technically wouldn't need to look for a Cayman S because the Cayman S's came with 6 speeds and I think the non-S's came with 5 speeds. And technically you could even look for an automatic car because those should be the cheapest. And if you had an automatic car, you could technically try to do Volkswagen DSG transmission on a K-Series, which is eventually what I'm gonna do on my EG. Use a K-Series and a Volkswagen DSG or dual clutch transmission. All that being said, I don't think it'll actually be feasible to put a engine and transmission from a K-Series, or at least the transversely mounted setup in one of these cars without doing a ton of reworking. The issue is if you look at the axle center line of the car and where the diff is positioned, right in line with the axle center line, and how much space we're working with between the suspension and where the diff center line goes, and you compare it to this swap that I have here, it is gonna be very tight to make that work in between the suspension. And realistically, I don't think it would be very feasible. Plus, the trunk is like right here where you would need to mount your turbo setup and exhaust system. So unless you're willing to do a lot of cutting on this car, I don't think it would really be feasible to try to mount a Honda K-Series with a transmission like this in the transverse configuration. But as we go further along, I may try to fit it in there and see what it's like and see how feasible it is. And if I do, I'll share that with you guys when we get to it. But for now, It's time to continue on and finish pulling out this engine. All right, guys, it's the next day. We actually didn't end up doing much after the end of the last clip.
We got to chatting.
Yeah, we just ended up chatting too much. And I don't want to actually rush taking this out because we're trying to figure out how feasible it is to do this engine swap. So I spent maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes more, and finally disconnected all the bits and pieces to drop this engine out. And I realized in the last clip, I didn't do a good enough job explaining what the deal is with this car. So this car, yes, it has a blown engine, and I've made a deal with the owner because no matter what, he has to do something with this car. It has a blown engine, it either needs to be fixed or it needs to be swapped. So the deal is, Eric and I are pulling the engine out. We're gonna test fit to see how feasible it is to put a K-Series in it. If it's not feasible, then we're gonna give him the car back with all the bits and pieces, and he will take care of it on his own, rebuild the Porsche engine, find another engine, whatever it may be. But if it is feasible, then I will buy this car and proceed with the project. So hopefully that clears that up. Now that I have more bits and pieces out, I know I said it doesn't seem too feasible to put the K-Series in transversely in its native orientation, but now that I have more pieces out, I'm feeling maybe it might be doable. Eric doesn't think so.
I think it's a waste of time.
No, I think it'll be a great idea. Anyways, so we're gonna continue pulling the engine out, get it out, and then we're gonna start test fitting this engine with with both the Honda transmission, and also we'll take the original Porsche transmission off of the Porsche engine. I have adapter plate, I'll actually adapt the transmission to the K-Series engine, and we'll start test fitting and see how it goes.
Mock-up time, let's go.
Yep, let's see. Well guys, engine is out. It was honestly not that bad. I thought it was gonna be much worse. Total time, I think we're into it for maybe 3 hours tops, and that was like not rushing, taking our time, scrutinizing the fitment of it in its place so that we could see how feasible it is to put the K-Series in its place. And like, it's interesting. This engine is massive. It is so big, but it is not tall. And when I mean not tall, it is relative, because its total height is actually pretty high. The issue is the center line of the crankshaft to the top of the engine. That's the critical measurement, because you can't really mess with where the center line of the crankshaft is due to the transmission location. You can't really mess with that too much. There's a little bit of play up or down technically, and we'd have to go down to utilize a K-Series attached to this original Porsche transmission. But now that it's out, I am actually very curious to see if we could put this whole configuration, this engine and transmission, in its place. Because when you look how big this thing is, and you look how small this is, and how much space we're working with, it's massive. It's tight in this back area, but I think I have an idea of how to solve that issue. So yeah, I think now that the engine's out, I think we're gonna roll this whole setup over to it, lower the car down, and see what we're working with, and see how feasible it is to put the Honda K-Series engine with the Honda K-Series transmission in this Porsche. All right, so we got the K-Series with the K-Series transmission attached still, all propped up on some wheels so we can roll it around and basically lower the car down and see how feasible it's going to be. Put the K-Series, transmission in the Cayman / Boxster engine bay. Now that the engine's out, I'm actually pretty confident it's gonna fit. There is just a lot more space than what it looked like with the engine in place. And the concerns I had before of the space between the suspension, I'm not as concerned about now. I have an idea of how to make this all work, and if this is gonna fit, if this fits nicely between the frame rails, and if it looks like the axle angle, it won't be too bad. So basically, the axle angle between where the suspension goes and where the diff line is as long as that angle isn't too bad, I think this is actually probably gonna be the best solution for putting a K-Series in the Cayman/Boxster. Using a Honda transmission simplifies things a lot and opens the swap up to a lot of other options. So I guess let's start lowering the car down, moving around the engine, and see what kind of space we're working with and if it's gonna work. All right, guys, so car lowered down over top of the engine, over top of the K-Series engine with the K-Series transmission. And right now, the way we have it, the engine positioned is with the standard Honda lean. They always tilt back a little bit. They tilt back roughly, I think it's something like 12 or 15 degrees back. And with the standard Honda lean, it doesn't look like we'll be able to clear the top of at least the top of the back of the engine bay, or the engine bay cover. There's a cover that normally bolts in over here. And it looks like we won't really be able to get the engine forward enough to clear this space with the regular lean. That being said, some engine mount kits, and what's offered in swaps is engine mount kits that position the K-Series engine straight up and down. So what I'm thinking is maybe we try to do that. We would put this engine in so that it is straight up and down, no tilt, lean back, no tilt back, and see if doing that will allow us enough clearance so that the valve cover can come up in this space over here, sort of, and not interfere over here. So I'm gonna lift the car back up, reposition the engine, and test fit it again. All right, guys, before I actually adjust the engine, I just wanted to make sure I captured it. So this is the standard K-Series lean, the way the engine basically tilts backwards. So the plan is to try to tilt it upright, maybe even have to tilt it forward a bit. Doing so would require us to make a custom oil pan to make it work. That's technically nothing new. There are kits that allow you to mount the K-Series engine perfectly straight up and down. And with those kits, you'd have to run an oil pan that has a flat bottom. But for now, what we'll do is just see how feasible it is to fit the engine in straight up and down. So let me readjust and we'll see how it goes. All right, guys, so here it is with the engine straight up and down. What do you think, Eric?
I think it's gonna need to lean a bit more.
I do too. I think it might have to go even further. And we talked to a friend, and apparently a lot of the kits aren't even just straight up and down. They're actually leaned a little bit more forward. So that might help. That might be a solution, but let's test it out straight up and down first and see how it fits in the engine bay like this. And then we'll try maybe with the tilt even forward afterwards. All right, guys, you know what? I think I've completely changed my mind. I know I've done a 180, and I said originally I didn't think that the K-Series with the K-Series transmission would fit in this swap, but you know what? I think I'm gonna have to backtrack on that. I actually think this is the best way to approach doing this swap in this chassis. Right now we have the engine sitting straight up and down and in the right position with plenty of ground clearance, and the engine fits in here perfectly without having to do any cutting, without having to do any trimming. We can technically fit the engine cover back on this if we utilize one of the low profile valve covers that I made for my Porsche 911 project. So that being said, this makes it pretty doable, and I am very optimistic now. I think this is actually the way to go. Using the Honda K-Series engine, Honda K-Series transmission, and mounting them in the native orientation that they would be found in what would be the front of the car, but now use it as a rear-wheel drive setup. So one other advantage to going this route is if we're using a Honda transmission, there's all kinds of options for transmissions. There is 6 speeds or 6 speeds with LSDs. Those would be factory ones. There's gear sets available for those transmissions. And yes, those transmissions are on the weaker side, but if you end up making a lot of power, then you could just switch it up to a Quaife sequential. And a Quaife sequential for a Honda is like half the price of a Quaife sequential for a Porsche. I'm excited because if all this works out, I'm very interested in possibly trying to find a good deal on an automatic Cayman and swapping a K-Series in with the Volkswagen DSG dual clutch transmission that I have. I already have everything to do that swap. I have the adapter plate, the transmission, and engine lined up for it all. I just need a good chassis. My idea was to do that swap into my EG, but you know what? If I can make this work in a Cayman, I think that would be even cooler. So I definitely think this is the way to go. There is, obviously it's tight and it's hard. It's not as easy to access as it would be in a front wheel drive setup, but it's not the worst. And there's still lots of room to work on this engine with access from this engine cover space. And also Porsche was nice enough to offer up this access space as well. So I think this is the way we're gonna go. It requires no cutting so far. We've identified no places that the car interferes with the engine, so I don't think we're gonna have to cut the car anywhere. But what it will require is a custom subframe, and that is where we're gonna come in. That's what we're gonna create for this kit. So the idea would be to basically make a whole subframe that the engine bolts to, and then you would basically lower the car down onto that subframe so that the whole thing becomes a bolt-on affair. So, and then as part of the kit, what we would offer is, hey Eric, as part of the kit, we would offer the subframe, drive shafts, a custom oil pan, and if you want to retain the factory engine cover, one of the valve covers as well. And then basically you have everything you need to swap a K-Series into a Porsche Cayman and theoretically into a Boxster as well. As long as we're not messing with the top of the engine cover, I don't see any reason why this kit wouldn't fit into a Boxster as well. So anyways, I think that's probably about it for this video. We're gonna continue working away. Hopefully you guys are interested in this. We are gonna keep you updated. Let me know what you think. Post it up in the comments. If you like the project, hit like, and if you haven't already, do me a favor and consider subscribing. So that's about it for this video. Thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll see you again soon. Bye now.